So, welcome to today's update video. You can see there's nothing organized in the Eastern Pacific yet. The system that the ANC has recently placed a tag on that I've been talking about is kind of off this page. It's kind of, if this map would continue to be right around here, the ANC has given this map a 50% chance of out within 5 days. And yes, this is based more or less the system I've been talking about. I mean, let's point out to because there's going to be a lot of differences. Let's point out between the GFS and European on this run. And it's best illustrated right here. Here's the European MGO forecast. They don't really forecast a robust MGO as the MGO moving into the dead circle rather into Eastern Pacific. It's not show that the GFS shows. The European does not show this. And however, you would think this would lead to a forecasting difference, and people on the internet suspect that's why the GFS is aggressive as it is. However, both the GFS/GFS and the European are relatively aggressive in keeping the upward motion of the Eastern Pacific for the next week or so. So I'm pointing this out so that before people don't jump out and think that, alright, the GFS is out to lunch, which it might be once you see these setups, but I mean. Alright, take a look at the GFS for a minute. Alright, so this is at 36 hours. This is the system the ANC now. This is the system that the GFS was previously showing. Doesn't show it anymore, but showed it in past runs. I mean, this is the main system that they're going to see develop where in this one. This is shown by the European. Keep this in mind because this is going to be important. There's been some very wild flip-flopping in the model runs. So actually, the 18Z GFS made some sense. But previously, there have been some very wild flip-flopping within the global model runs. You can see the GFS tries to somewhat develop the system that, at least in this one, the system that the European is showing that never really does so as it gets taken over by what's originally a small system. And then eventually gets much bigger as it steadily intensifies into a very, very robust and potent hurricane. Actually, by around its peak, actually has a very large hurricane with pressure of, I think, 934 millibars by day 8. Then has a weakening slowly around day 9, and a new system tries to form further to the south. I mean, previous runs have showed something relatively similar, and brings shows a very small system moving inland on day 10, like moving New Mexico, while another system. So, alright, so this is modeled by the GFS 3 system. So this is the first one. There was one that I mentioned that tried to form but got merged into this potent system. Then there's these two systems. This system right here and this system right here. So it's these three. GFS moves in this one moves one inland pretty quickly. And then the GFS makes the middle system a very robust hurricane as it passes just south of Socorro Island, and then eventually, by the end of the run, moves this system into eventually bending back towards the United States. The once very powerful one, then has this system moving west, and then at the end of the 16-day run, has a new system developing. So let's think of that again. As this system up here, then has a new system. This system has a new system developing on day 16. Then the European is a little bit different here. The European doesn't show that third row I was talking about that the previous GFS runs had. I know it's confusing. I know it's a lot of systems. So basically, to summarize, it's the main GFS system, and with 2 rows next to it. That one, the European's going to show, as you can see here. As you can see by day 5 it's shown here. And this, it actually separates pretty nicely from the main GFS. Then eventually, but then as a result, on the main European run, even though the ensembles have been very all over the place, I'll get to that in a second. It starts to develop the system, the main system that GFS has been showing much later on. It starts to develop it around day 7, starts to organize it, even though it's still bad and ragged at the end of the period. And then starts to develop a system down south again, and possibly one behind that. It's kind of hard to tell since the European only goes out to day 10. And let's show it now looking at the vorticity maximum. Maybe this will make it a little bit more easier. We're going to talk about the differences between the two. So obviously I know this is confusing, but to summarize, the GFS has 3 low pressure systems eventually developing. The middle one's the one the Mars meets on. The one on the left, actually this is not really a good example, but this is the one. This is the one on the left, this is the middle one, this is the right one. If you want to see on the present vorticity maximum. The one on the left is the one that the European's been showing. The GFS kind of closes it off the past few runs. The one on the right is the one that GFS is showing. Then this is the main one. Then eventually, depending on the model of your choice, about GFS is developing 3 more systems after that. Obviously still a ways away, but that's just kind of to summarize. Let's take a look at the GFS. Let's take a look at the European vorticity, because it's maybe make it a little bit easier to explain, because there's a bit of a difference, obviously, in strength, because obviously the European only makes the middle system, which is the main system here, a tropical, most runs have made this system either like a strong tropical, storm, low, and hurricane, while the GFS has been insisting on a category 4 or 5 hurricane, and a very massive one. And it's a little bit interesting to see the differences between the two. I mean, both are showing fairly conducive environments. It appears to be so given by the convective Cooper wave forecasting. But it appears, at least on the European runs, that the development of this system probably provides some outflow into some shear, and that kind of consolidates, it slows the very broad development of this system. And then as the system to its left of the European choice moves out of the picture, this system, even though it appears much, it's hard to tell, but the system appears to be facing some shear. You can see it's tilted diagonally and slowly its broad size early on, but even that eventually has again going really consolidating by day 10. Before by that time, obviously the system will probably in cool waters. And it's interesting to know, I mean, conditions, even though compared to the GFS, which by almost has a similar time frame, has a very large hurricane, you can see the conditions appear similarly fairly conducive. If you look at the upper level outflow set, you can see some massive equatorward outflows. It's likely to have a huge intertropical burden zone feeder band because of the strength of this convective Cooper wave MJO pulse. And there's likely to be, even though it's hard to say for sure, some sort of polarward outflow to its north, which something that both the European and especially the GFS models show. I mean, it's hard, that does not appear to be the main difference. The main difference, as I just said, actually appears to be the fact that the resolution appears to be the fact that the European has this system developing a little bit further quicker, and has this middle system developing a little bit slower and a little bit at a kind of a weird angle. It's been kind of showing on those tilted directional storms, almost like a messy shear system, even though it doesn't appear to be much shear. So it's kind of hard to see what goes on. It has a sheared look, but I don't see any obvious indications of shear. It appears, to me, judging by the upper level outflow channels, that there's at least whatever shear there is appears to be steadily subsiding. So it's kind of hard to say. I think, I mean, there's obviously there appears to be obviously some shear if you look at the day 5 forecast from this disturbances, but I don't see any shear thereafter, so it's kind of hard to say why it's pretty slow to develop the system. And I don't have as much confidence in the European model as I normally do, just because of the fact that the European and some systems have been all over the place with the system. I mean, let's take a look at what they had one run Sunday randomly. They had 2 systems developing. I mean, this is the left system, this is the right system, I believe. You go back another run Saturday. The GFS had a fairly robust hurricane and a low shear environment with some pretty good upper-level anticyclonic flow, although not the equator outflow that the GFS is showing. So point being is that the Europeans been all over the place with this. So I don't have as much confidence. And you can see with the GFS showing a very favorable pattern. It's also showing a very favorable upper-level anticyclonic pattern with a fairly massive anticyclone near the system, even though there's obviously a larger one here, and we'll see how this plays out. However, there are some historical biases the GFS tends to have that may make the European a bit more credible. Obviously, the European GFS models get into a lot of model wars, or so-called model wars. They disagree on something for like a few days, and eventually 1 or 2 models cave. I mean, we saw the European GFS have one most recently in this basin with Invest 93, when that's actually one of the few instances with the GFS where most of the time the European wins. I mean, an example of this is Hurricane Ana in 2014, where the European had a weaker storm passing Hawaii, where the GFS, JFDL, and HWF were kind of bringing a major hurricane much closer to Hawaii, but the European was the conservative option that actually turned out to be correct. And the second reason is because we have a massive MJO pulse, and the GFS propagates the MJO fast, and it has a tendency to propagate the MJO too fast. The third reason is that the GFS, since its 2015 upgrade, had a tendency to overdo the intensity of the system. The GFS is sort of on and off. The GFS is either really passive, like it is like during, especially in quiet MJO pulses, or during active MJO pulses, it's really bullish. Even though, to be fair, the past couple of seasons, the Eastern Pacific conditions have been favorable, and these systems have usually gotten as strong, not stronger, than the highest computer models. So it's kind of hard to say, but there's also so it's hard to say, so I would not discount GFS completely at all. I think, but I still would bank on a minimal hurricane. It's also worth pointing out that if the system gets as large as expected, it's possible, depending how much shear, which I kind of touched on when I talked about the European runs, how much shear the system encounters, it's possible that there may be some dry air that gets trained through circulation. Now, the system appears to be starting out small and with a very good moisture envelope, and those two factors do significantly help in terms of intensity, so it's very hard to say. I mean, obviously dry has been an issue this year, though. Looking at the vertical instability products that seem to have subsided, and you can see the storm's upper-level outflow in this case seems to be, at least so far, being modeled, seems to be keeping the dry out, but something to keep an eye on. And if the system gets large enough and starts undergoing multiple eyewall replacement cycles, it will definitely inherit some drier air, and/or its inner core is disrupted by shear, as I mentioned earlier. Anyhow, that's it for this video. Obviously, we'll be very busy. The situation is sort of complex, but I think, in general, the European ensembles, they may be caving to the GFS a little bit, because on the 12 European ensembles, which had previously constantly been shifting, but the left started to shift a bit to the right and a bit more in line with the GFS. And they were less bullish on the leftover system that the European has been showing. And everything that's right here on this GFS run. Anyhow, that's it for today's video. I mean, obviously it's going to be interesting next day or so. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye!